That summer, the Parker family had everything to look forward to. Sun-soaked beaches, long walks by the ocean, and the kind of memories that last a lifetime. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. A father and his little girl, hand in hand, taking a much-needed break from the real world. But for Lisa Parker, that vacation became something else entirely. It became the last time she ever saw her husband and daughter. 22 years. That's how long it had been since Mark and Emily Parker vanished without a trace. One moment, they were checking into a cozy seaside inn, bags packed, smiles wide. The next, they were gone. No calls, no letters, no signs of struggle, just an empty hotel room and unanswered questions. Lisa spent years searching, chasing down every lead, knocking on doors that never opened. She refused to believe they were simply gone. But with every passing year, the hope inside her dimmed. The police tried. Reporters ran their stories. Psychics, private investigators, even internet sleuths obsessed over the mystery. How could a man and his 8-year-old daughter disappear so completely? There were theories, of course. Some whispered that Mark had run away, starting a new life somewhere far away. Others feared the worst, that something sinister had happened, something unthinkable. But no matter how many theories surfaced, one thing remained certain. Lisa never got the closure she desperately needed. Then, on a quiet morning, as she went through a stack of bills and junk mail, Lisa's hands began to tremble. There, buried beneath the ordinary, was an envelope with no return address. Her name was printed on the front in shaky handwriting. No stamp, no postmark, just a simple, unremarkable envelope that shouldn't have meant anything. But the moment she picked it up, she felt it. A chill, deep in her bones. Her breath caught as she tore it open, fingers fumbling, heart pounding. And then she saw it. A single sheet of paper. 5 words, written in a familiar scrawl. The handwriting of a man she hadn't seen in over 2 decades. Lisa, I never meant to leave. Her vision blurred. Her heart pounded in her ears. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. But there it was right in front of her. After 22 years of silence, the man who vanished without a trace had finally spoken. But why now? And what did he mean? Lisa's hands trembled as she clutched the letter, her mind racing in 1,000 directions at once. Her breathing turned shallow, and the room around her seemed to shrink. She read the words again, over and over, as if they might change or reveal something more. But they didn't. 5 words. That was all. Words that carried the weight of 22 years of unanswered questions. She pressed the letter against her chest, shutting her eyes, trying to steady herself. Could this really be from Mark? After all this time, it had to be some kind of cruel joke. Someone playing with her emotions, dragging her back into a pain she had spent years learning to live with. But deep down, something told her otherwise. The handwriting, she knew it too well. She had seen those letters and birthday cards, on grocery lists stuck to the fridge, in love notes tucked under her pillow in the early years of their marriage. She traced her fingers over the ink, feeling a strange mixture of fear and longing. If this letter was real, it meant that Mark was alive. But if he had been alive all these years, why hadn't he come back? Lisa's mind flooded with memories. The day they left for that trip had been like any other. Mark had been excited. He had planned everything down to the smallest detail. Where they would stay, the places they would visit, the foods Emily would love to try. He had always been like that, careful and thoughtful. She had kissed them goodbye, waving as they drove off, never imagining that it would be the last time she would see them. The call had come 2 days later. The hotel staff had found their room untouched. Their bags were still packed. The rental car sat in the parking lot, keys on the nightstand. But Mark and Emily were gone. No signs of a struggle. No evidence of foul play. Just gone. Lisa had gone numb. She remembered standing in that hotel room, staring at their things, expecting them to walk through the door any second. She remembered the police questioning her over and over. Did they have problems? Was Mark unhappy? Could he have taken Emily and left? She had answered the same way every time, no. He would never do that. He loved their daughter more than anything in the world. He wouldn't just disappear. But as days turned into weeks and then months, the questions changed. People started looking at her differently, as if she had missed something obvious, as if she had ignored some dark secret. But there had been nothing. At least, nothing she had seen. Now, 22 years later, a single letter threatened to unravel everything. Lisa forced herself to sit down, gripping the letter tightly, her heart still hammering. She needed to think. If Mark was alive, where had he been all this time? And why had he waited so long to contact her? Had he been in danger? Had something stopped him from reaching out before? And then there was Emily. Lisa's stomach turned at the thought. Was her little girl, no, not little anymore, was Emily alive too? Had she spent the last 2 decades somewhere out there, lost, waiting to be found? Lisa's throat tightened. She had imagined every possible scenario over the years. She had feared the worst but had never allowed herself to believe it. She couldn't. She picked up the envelope again, hoping for more clues. No return address. No postmark. That meant it hadn't been mailed in the traditional way. Someone had delivered it by hand. But who? And when? She rushed to the front door, throwing it open, her eyes scanning the street. It was quiet. Too quiet. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. There was no sign of anyone nearby. No cars idling suspiciously. No strangers lurking in the distance. She turned back inside, shutting the door firmly behind her. Her pulse raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Someone had come to her house, walked up her driveway, and slipped this letter into her mailbox. That meant they knew where she lived. Had they been watching her? A chill ran down her spine. She knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help. But from who? The police had long since closed the case. To them, it was a cold file buried beneath years of newer, more pressing investigations. She had begged them to keep looking, but after so many dead ends, they had moved on. Lisa grabbed her phone with shaky hands, hesitating for a moment before dialing. "Hey, it's me," she said when the familiar voice answered. "Lisa." The surprise was evident. "It's been a long time." "I know," she said quickly. "I need to see you. It's important." There was a pause. "Is this about?" "Yes." She exhaled shakily. "I got a letter." Silence. Then a sharp inhale on the other end. "Where are you?" "I'm coming over." Lisa gave her address and hung up, her heart still racing. She had spent years pushing people away, unwilling to drag them into her grief. But right now she needed someone who understood. Someone who had been there when it all fell apart. She paced the living room, her mind swirling with questions. What if this was the first of many letters? What if Mark was trying to reach her, but he couldn't say more? Or worse, what if he was in danger? And then another thought hit her. If Mark was alive, why hadn't he said anything about Emily? The weight of it crashed over her, and she sank onto the couch, gripping the letter tightly. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope could break her all over again. And yet, she had no choice. She had to find out the truth. Even if it meant opening wounds she had spent decades trying to heal. Even if it meant facing the unthinkable. A knock at the door sent a jolt through Lisa's body. She had been staring at the letter for what felt like hours, her mind running in circles. But now she had to pull herself together. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was James Carter. He had been Mark's best friend since college, the kind of friend who stuck around through every high and low. After Mark and Emily disappeared, James had done everything he could to help Lisa. He had searched, made calls, even hired a private investigator when the police stopped looking. But over the years, the frustration and heartbreak had worn them both down. The more time passed, the less they spoke. Eventually, Lisa stopped answering his calls, tired of hearing the same hopeless words. Maybe it's time to let go. But now, as she stood face to face with him, she saw the same look of disbelief she felt inside. "You said you got a letter," James said, stepping inside. Lisa handed it to him without a word. She watched his expression shift as he read it, his brows furrowing deeper with every second. "This is his handwriting," he muttered, turning the paper over as if another clue might be hidden on the back. "I know," Lisa said. "It's him, James. It has to be." James exhaled sharply and sat down on the couch. He ran a hand through his graying hair, shaking his head. "I don't understand. After all these years, why now?" Lisa sat across from him, gripping her hands tightly. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. There's no return address, No sign of where it came from. Someone had to drop it off in person. James rubbed his chin deep in thought. You think he's trying to tell you something? I don't know. But if Mark is alive, Lisa's voice cracked. She couldn't bring herself to say it. If Mark is alive, where is Emily? James picked up on it immediately. There's no mention of her. Lisa swallowed hard. That's what scares me the most. The room fell into a heavy silence. The sound of the clock ticking felt deafening. James finally spoke. We need to be smart about this. If Mark wanted to reach you, he wouldn't just write 5 words and disappear again. Either he's in trouble, or he trailed off, but Lisa knew what he was thinking. Or someone else sent this letter, she finished. James nodded slowly. We need to figure out where this came from. Maybe there's something the police missed. Lisa hesitated. You really think they'll reopen the case after all this time? Maybe not officially, James admitted. But I know someone who still works at the station. She might be willing to pull some old files for us. Lisa's mind was already racing ahead. If they could get access to the original reports, maybe they'd find something they had overlooked. A detail that hadn't seemed important before but mattered now. James leaned forward. Before we do anything, I need to ask you something. Lisa met his gaze. What? Are you ready for what we might find? She hesitated. Was she? For 22 years, she had begged for answers. But what if the truth was worse than the uncertainty? What if Mark hadn't been taken? What if he had left by choice? What if Emily was? Lisa pushed the thought away. I need to know, she said firmly. James studied her for a moment before nodding. All right, let's start with the letter. Maybe there's something here we're missing. They examined it together, checking the paper, the ink, even the envelope. But there was nothing unusual, no hidden messages, no secret markings. Just the chilling words, Lisa, I never meant to leave. James sighed. Whoever delivered this had to know your schedule. They knew exactly when to leave it without being seen. Lisa's eyes widened. You think someone's been watching me? James didn't answer right away. It's possible. A shiver ran down Lisa's spine. She stood up and moved to the window, peering outside. The street looked the same as always, quiet, ordinary. But was it? Had someone been there, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment? James stood beside her. We should check your security cameras. Lisa let out a short, bitter laugh. I don't have any. James frowned. We need to change that. She turned to him. You really think this is that serious? James didn't hesitate. Yes. Lisa's stomach tightened. She had spent years drowning in the loss, trying to move forward, forcing herself to exist in a world that had taken everything from her. But now, with just one letter, the past had come rushing back. And she had a feeling it wasn't done with her yet. Later that night, as Lisa lay in bed, sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the moment she had opened that letter. Mark's handwriting, his words, the way her heart had nearly stopped. She thought about Emily, about what she would look like now, 22 years older. Would she even remember her mother? Did she know Lisa had never stopped looking for her? Tears slipped down her cheeks. Then a noise. Lisa froze. It was faint, but distinct, the sound of something moving outside. She sat up, her heart hammering. The house was dark, but she could see the glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Holding her breath, she listened. Silence. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind. But then another sound. Closer this time. Someone was out there. Lisa's pulse skyrocketed. Moving as quietly as possible, she slipped out of bed and grabbed her phone. She tiptoed to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain just an inch. A shadow. It was there for only a second. A dark figure moving just beyond the street lamp's reach. Then gone. Lisa's breath came in short gasps. She wanted to believe it was nothing, but deep down she knew. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching her. Lisa's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, her pulse roaring in her ears. She stared out the window, straining to see past the street lamp's glow, but the shadow was gone. Had she imagined it? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Or had someone been standing there, watching her house? She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. She needed to be smart. If someone was out there, she couldn't panic. She couldn't make a mistake. Stepping back from the window, she dialed James. He answered on the second ring. Lisa, what's wrong? There was someone outside, she whispered, gripping the phone tighter. I saw a shadow. Just for a second. But I know someone was there. James didn't hesitate. Lock your doors. I'm on my way. Lisa hurried to the front door, double-checking the locks, her fingers shaking as she flipped the deadbolt. She checked the back door, the windows, everything was shut tight, but it didn't matter. Whoever had left that letter had already been close enough to touch her mailbox. And now someone was outside, watching her. Minutes felt like hours as she stood in the darkened house, listening to every creak, every rustle of the wind. Then, headlights flooded her driveway. Lisa exhaled in relief as James stepped out of his car, scanning the street before jogging up to her door. She unlocked it quickly, letting him inside. Did you see anyone? She asked. James shook his head. No, but that doesn't mean they weren't here. He was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling my contact at the station. We need to take this seriously. Lisa hugged her arms around herself, trying to steady her nerves. What if it's Mark? She whispered. James hesitated, his expression unreadable. If it was Mark, why wouldn't he just knock on the door? Why leave a letter and disappear? Lisa had no answer. Nothing about this made sense. James made his call, stepping into the other room as he spoke in hushed tones. Lisa sank onto the couch, exhaustion pressing down on her, but sleep was impossible. Her mind wouldn't stop spinning. She thought back to the letter. Lisa, I never meant to leave. She had read those words 100 times now, searching for hidden meaning, for something she might have missed. And then it hit her. The phrasing. Not I didn't leave. Not I was taken. He had said I never meant to leave. Her breath caught. What if Mark had left that night but not by choice? Before she could dwell on it, James walked back in, his face grim. They're sending a patrol car to check the area, but there's not much they can do right now. No crime has been committed. Lisa nodded, barely hearing him. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. I need to go back, she said suddenly. James frowned. Back where? The hotel, she whispered. Where Mark and Emily disappeared. James stared at her for a long moment. Lisa, it's been 22 years. What do you think you'll find? I don't know, she admitted. But I can't just sit here. Someone, maybe Mark, is trying to tell me something. And if I don't start looking for answers, I might lose my chance. James ran a hand down his face, clearly torn. It's a long shot, he muttered. Then, after a deep sigh, he nodded. All right. We'll go in the morning. Lisa felt a small flicker of relief. She wasn't alone in this. Not yet. That night. She barely slept. Every noise made her jump. Every shadow seemed to move. But by morning, she was more determined than ever. The drive to the hotel was eerily familiar. The road hadn't changed much over the years, and Lisa felt her stomach twist with every mile. By the time they reached the old seaside town, her hands were clammy. The hotel still stood, though time had worn it down. The paint was chipped, the sign weathered, but it was still there. The place where everything had stopped. James parked, and they both sat in silence for a moment, staring up at the building. You ready for this? He asked. Lisa exhaled slowly. No, but let's do it anyway. They stepped inside, the scent of salt and aging wood hitting her immediately. The front desk was manned by a woman who barely glanced up from her computer. Lisa hesitated, then stepped forward. Excuse me, she said. I was hoping to ask about a stay from a long time ago. The woman sighed, pushing her glasses up. How long ago? Lisa swallowed. 22 years. That got her attention. The woman gave her a wary look. That's a long time. What's this about? Lisa pulled out her phone, opening an old picture. A photo of Mark and Emily, taken just days before they vanished. Have you ever seen them before? She asked, her voice tight. The woman leaned in, studying the image. Then something shifted in her expression. Recognition. Lisa's pulse quickened. You have seen them. The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. I wasn't working here back then, but I've seen that man before. Lisa's stomach dropped. Where? The woman lowered her voice. He was here. A few months ago. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. What? James stepped closer. Are you sure? The woman nodded. Yeah. He didn't stay long. Just walked in, asked a few questions about an old reservation, then left. Lisa's mind reeled. Mark had been here. After all these years, he had come back. What did he ask about? She managed. The woman frowned, trying to remember. Something about records. He wanted to see who had checked in after him. Said he lost something important and was trying to track it down. Lisa's heart pounded. This wasn't random. Mark had been looking for something. Or someone. James exchanged a glance with her. He understood. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Lisa felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Mark had been here months ago. That meant he had been alive, searching for something, retracing the same steps she was taking now. But why? And why hadn't he tried to contact her directly? James shifted beside her, his voice low and urgent. Did he say anything else? Anything about where he was going next? The woman behind the counter shook her head. No, just that he was looking for an old record. He seemed tense, kept glancing over his shoulder like someone was following him. Lisa's breath hitched. Someone following him? A cold feeling settled in her chest. Had Mark been in danger this whole time? Do you still have the records he asked about? James asked. The woman hesitated, then sighed. Technically, I'm not supposed to give out guest information. But if this is about finding someone, she trailed off, looking at Lisa again, then nodded. Let me see what I can find. She turned to her computer, typing quickly, while Lisa and James exchanged a glance. Mark had been here. He had been searching. And now Lisa was sure. This wasn't just about him disappearing. Something bigger was at play. A few minutes later, the woman turned the screen toward them. This is a list of check-ins from right after your husband's stay, she said. It's not much, but maybe something will stand out. Lisa scanned the names, her heart pounding. She didn't recognize any of them, until her eyes landed on one that made her stomach drop. Richard Hale. She barely heard James ask, "Who's that?" before she whispered, "He was one of the detectives on the case." James's head snapped toward her. Wait. You're saying the lead detective checked into the same hotel right after Mark and Emily vanished? Lisa nodded, her mind racing. She hadn't thought about Richard Hale in years. He had been one of the officers assigned to the case, one of the first to interview her, to ask questions, to lead the search. But he had left the force years ago, suddenly and without explanation. And now here he was, his name in black and white, right after her family had disappeared. James exhaled sharply. This can't be a coincidence. Lisa's stomach churned. If Mark came back looking for this, then maybe he figured something out. James nodded grimly. And if someone didn't want him to? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Lisa turned back to the woman at the desk. Do you have a forwarding address or any contact info for Richard Hale? She hesitated. Not in the system, no. But if he used a credit card, maybe the bank has something. Lisa wasn't willing to wait for red tape. If Mark had found something, and if it had put him in danger, she had to act now. James seemed to be thinking the same thing. We should find him ourselves. Lisa nodded. But we need to be careful. If Mark was looking into this and something happened to him, she couldn't finish the sentence. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then we make sure it doesn't happen to you. They left the hotel, stepping into the crisp afternoon air. Lisa took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, frowning at the unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. Hello. At first, there was only silence. Then a voice. Low. Cautious. Familiar. Lisa. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. Mark, she whispered. James stiffened beside her, eyes widening. The voice on the line exhaled shakily. You need to stop looking. Lisa's heart pounded. Where are you? I got your letter. Why didn't you? Lisa, listen to me. Mark cut her off, his voice urgent. You don't understand. It's not safe. They've been watching you. Her blood ran cold. Who? Mark, who's watching me? James grabbed her arm, trying to listen in, but the line crackled. You have to let it go. Mark's voice was barely a whisper now. Forget about me. Forget about Emily. It's the only way you'll be safe. Lisa's chest tightened, anger and desperation surging inside her. How can you say that? I've spent 22 years searching for you. For our daughter. You owe me an answer. A loud noise cut through the call. A rustling. Then a sharp intake of breath. Then the line went dead. Lisa stood frozen. The phone still pressed to her ear, her body trembling. James grabbed her shoulders. What happened? Lisa barely found her voice. He was cut off. Like someone got to him. James swore under his breath. We need to move. Now. Lisa's mind raced. The letter. The shadow outside her house. The old detective's name in the records. Mark's call, his warning. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. Someone was trying to keep the truth buried. And they were willing to do whatever it took to stop her from uncovering it. Lisa's heart pounded as she stared at her phone. The dead call still displayed on the screen. Mark had found her after 22 years of silence. But instead of answers, he had given her a warning. And now he was gone again. James didn't waste a second. We need to track that call. If Mark's in danger, we have to find him now. Lisa snapped out of her shock, nodding quickly. They rushed back to James's car, and he immediately started working his connections. His contacts at the station weren't supposed to trace personal calls without proper cause, but James wasn't waiting for permission. Within minutes, he had something. The call bounced through several locations, but the origin was within a few miles of here, James said, his voice tight. It came from a rural area outside town. If Mark was there, he might still be. Lisa felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. If Mark had risked calling her, maybe he wanted to be found. Or maybe he was warning her because he knew it was already too late for him. They sped down the highway, the tension thick in the air. Lisa gripped the door handle, her mind racing. Was Emily with him? Had she been alive all these years, hidden away? As they reached the outskirts of town, the roads became more isolated. James followed the location data, leading them down a narrow dirt road lined with overgrown trees. The place felt abandoned, but Lisa's instincts screamed that something was here, something she wasn't supposed to find. Then they saw it. A small, weathered cabin tucked away behind the trees. No lights. No movement. James pulled the car to a stop, scanning the area. Stay close, he muttered. Lisa nodded, swallowing hard. Every nerve in her body was on high alert. They approached the cabin cautiously. The door was slightly ajar. James pushed it open and they stepped inside. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and old wood. Papers were scattered across a rickety table, along with an old, half-drunk cup of coffee. Someone had been here recently. Lisa's eyes darted around, taking in the space. A small cot in the corner, a duffel bag, a photo. Her breath caught. It was a picture of Emily. Older. Recent. Tears burned her eyes. She snatched up the photo, fingers trembling. Emily wasn't a little girl anymore. She was grown. Alive. A noise outside made James spin around, drawing his gun. Lisa barely had time to react before footsteps pounded toward them. A figure burst through the door. Mark. Lisa gasped, her body freezing in place. He looked different. His hair streaked with gray, his face lined with age and exhaustion. But his eyes were the same, wide with panic. You shouldn't be here, he rasped, his gaze darting between them. You have to leave. Lisa's legs finally moved, and before she could stop herself, she stepped forward and slapped him. Mark barely reacted. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his expression a mix of guilt and urgency. You disappeared, Lisa choked out, her voice shaking. You left me. You let me suffer for 22 years. Where is Emily? What happened to you? Mark swallowed hard. I was trying to protect you. Lisa shook her head furiously. From what? Before he could answer, another noise came from outside. A car engine. Headlights cutting through the trees. Mark's face paled. They followed you. James tensed, gripping his gun. Who? Mark exhaled sharply. The people who took Emily. Lisa's blood ran cold. Took her? Mark nodded, his voice tight with emotion. I didn't leave Lisa. I was forced to. That night at the hotel, I stepped out for a second, and when I came back, Emily was gone. I tried to call the police, but someone grabbed me. They told me if I didn't disappear, if I ever contacted you, they'd kill her. Lisa's breath hitched. Who are they? Mark's jaw clenched. I don't know everything, but I know Richard Hale was involved. James's eyes darkened. The old detective. Mark nodded. I think he was covering something up. I think he knew who took Emily. And when I started asking questions, they made me disappear too. Lisa's hands clenched into fists. And Emily? Mark hesitated. I think she escaped. A few months ago, I started getting messages. Someone was leaving clues for me, leading me back here. Lisa's pulse pounded. You think it was her? Before Mark could answer, a loud voice cut through the night. Come out, Mark. It's over. Lisa turned toward the door, her stomach twisting. A man stood outside, his face illuminated by the headlights of a black SUV. Richard Hale. The old detective was older now, but his presence was just as commanding. His hand rested on his hip, near a gun. James whispered, Lisa, stay behind me. Mark exhaled shakily. They won't let any of us walk away. Lisa's hands balled into fists. I'm not walking away without Emily. Hale's voice came again. Last warning, Mark. You know how this ends. Lisa glanced at Mark. Does he know where she is? Mark nodded slightly. I think so. Lisa's fear melted into something else. Pure determination. She had spent too long being scared, waiting for answers. She stepped forward, past James and Mark, straight into the doorway. Hale's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe even amusement. Mrs. Carter, he said smoothly. I was wondering when you'd show up. Lisa met his gaze, unflinching. Where is my daughter? Hale sighed. You should have listened to your husband. Lisa's pulse pounded. But before Hale could move, another noise came from the trees. A branch snapping. Then, a figure stepped into the light. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Emily. She was older, taller, her face sharper, but it was her. For a moment, time stopped. Hale's expression darkened. Damn it, he muttered, reaching for his gun. But Emily was faster. She raised her own weapon, one she must have taken from whoever had been holding her captive, and fired a single shot. Hale dropped. Silence. Lisa's knees nearly gave out. Emily stood there, breathing hard, her hands shaking. Her eyes met Lisa's, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Lisa ran to her daughter, pulling her into a trembling embrace. Emily clung to her. Mom, she whispered. Lisa choked back a sob. I'm here. I found you. Behind them, Mark let out a shaky breath. James kept his gun raised, checking for more threats. But for the first time in 22 years, Lisa wasn't thinking about the danger. She was holding her daughter again. Emily was safe, and nothing else mattered, or so she thought, until Emily pulled back, her face pale. They're not done, Emily whispered. Hale wasn't the only one. There's more, and they're coming. Lisa's breath caught. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. Lisa's grip on Emily tightened as the weight of her daughter's words sank in. This wasn't over. Even with Richard Hale lying motionless on the ground, even with Emily finally back in her arms, danger was still closing in. James scanned the trees, his gun still raised, his body tense. Mark's face was pale, his breath coming in short bursts as he processed what had just happened. Lisa didn't hesitate. She pulled Emily closer and whispered, We have to get out of here. Now. Emily nodded, her eyes darting toward the shadows beyond the trees. There's another car down the road. They won't let me go that easily. Lisa's heart clenched. Who are they, Emily? Who's after you? Emily hesitated, swallowing hard. I don't know their names, but they've been watching me my whole life. I was raised in different houses with different people pretending to be my guardians. But I was never free. And when I started asking questions, they locked me away. Lisa felt sick. All this time you were alive, but you were a prisoner. Emily's gaze flickered with pain. Yes, and when I finally escaped, I knew I had to find you. But I couldn't do it alone. That's why I left those messages for Dad. Mark exhaled shakily, stepping toward them. It was you, all those clues. You were leading me back to you. Emily nodded. But I wasn't the only one watching. She glanced at Hale's body, then at the SUV still idling nearby. They'll come looking for him soon. Lisa exchanged a glance with James. He nodded sharply. We leave. Now. Without another word, they ran to James's car. The night felt too quiet, the air too still. Lisa's pulse hammered as she helped Emily into the back seat, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. James peeled out of the driveway, gravel flying behind them as they sped down the dark road. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. James cursed under his breath. We've got company. Lisa twisted in her seat. A second black SUV had emerged onto the road, closing in fast. Emily's voice was urgent. They won't stop. Lisa turned back to James. Can you lose them? James's grip on the wheel tightened. I can try. The car lurched forward as he pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The engine roared as they sped down the empty highway, but the SUV behind them stayed close. Lisa's breath caught as another pair of headlights appeared in the distance, coming toward them. We're boxed in, Mark muttered. James's eyes flicked between the two vehicles. His mind was working fast. Then, suddenly, he veered off the road, sending them bouncing onto a narrow dirt path through the trees. The sudden move made the pursuing SUV swerve, struggling to follow. Branches scraped against the car as they sped through the dense woods. Lisa gripped the seat, her heart pounding. The second vehicle hesitated at the entrance of the path, unsure whether to follow. James took the opportunity. He yanked the wheel hard, cutting sharply through a clearing. Then, just as suddenly as they had entered the woods, they emerged onto another paved road, a back route leading toward the city. The SUV behind them never made it out. Lisa turned, watching as their pursuers struggled in the uneven terrain before disappearing into the darkness behind them. They had bought themselves time. James didn't slow down until they reached the outskirts of town. Only then did Lisa let out a shaky breath, her body still buzzing with fear. Emily sat stiffly in the back seat, her hands clenched into fists. Lisa turned to her. You're safe now, she whispered. Emily met her gaze. For now. Mark ran a hand down his face. We need to go to the police. The real police. There has to be someone who isn't in on this. James nodded. I have a contact at the state level. Someone I trust. Lisa exhaled. Then let's do it. Let's end this. The rest of the night passed in a blur. James made the call, and within an hour they were sitting in a secured office in the state police department, telling everything they knew. The truth unraveled quickly after that. Hale had been part of a trafficking ring, one that operated under the guise of an adoption network. Emily had been taken and raised under their control, shuffled between different locations to keep her hidden. When Mark had started asking questions all those years ago, Hale had forced him into hiding, using Emily's safety as leverage. But Emily had been smarter than they thought. She had found ways to leave behind clues, to track her past, to connect the dots that even Lisa and Mark hadn't been able to. Now, with Hale dead and his network exposed, arrests were made within days. The people who had kept Emily prisoner were taken down one by one. But none of it felt real until Lisa sat across from her daughter in a quiet cafe a week later, staring at her, taking in every detail. Emily stirred her coffee absently, then looked up. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if this never happened? Lisa swallowed the lump in her throat. Every day. Emily nodded slowly. Me too. A heavy silence stretched between them. Then, Emily took a deep breath. I don't know how to be normal, Mom. Lisa's chest ached. Then we'll figure it out together. Emily studied her, then gave a small, hesitant smile. I'd like that. Lisa reached across the table, placing her hand over Emily's. The past was a scar they would both carry, but for the first time in 22 years, Lisa wasn't searching anymore. She had found her daughter, and that was enough.